Hey everyone, welcome back to Pro AV Today. You know, when I say the word control rooms, typically one of two things comes to people's mind. It's the massive CNN control room where you see switchers and consoles everywhere, or, you know, you think about the NASA command center where there's 75 people in a room, everybody's looking at the massive screen. But, you know, the reality is quite different from that. And there's a nice happy medium in the middle where a lot of people live. And I brought on two industry experts today to talk a little bit about what that user looks like and what that control room experience looks like. We've got Dan Gundry and Brent Limer. Gentlemen, thanks so much for coming on Pro AV today.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
And Dan, we'll have you kick us off here. When it comes to control rooms, I hinted at it obviously a little bit here. There's a bit of disparity and misunderstanding with the current state of the control room market, not only in the general public, but even across AV too. Give us just a quick, succinct understanding of where are control rooms these days?
Yeah, great question. And I absolutely agree that there's a little bit of confusion out there, some miscommunication and definitely misunderstanding. Control rooms are really, they've penetrated every corner of the market from in your world where you have social media monitoring centers, right, that are constantly out there looking at what people are saying for either threat analysis, brand awareness, brand defense is a concept there. All the way up to, you were talking about command and control environments such as NASA's control room. And then you've got the broadcast side of it. So you got this full spectrum, and there are lots of other little tentacles that go out there. But nowadays, we're seeing command and control environments in just about every vertical market, and you can define vertical market however you want to. We're seeing them in every price point, from a small little home-based command center like I might have here in my home office, to, again, those grandiose, game master from Hunger Games type of, futuristic control rooms, which are being done out there today as we speak.
Well, Brent, let's talk about that a little bit more. One of the things that obviously, as Dan brings up, is there's a lot of scale to what we'll call our modern control room and command center environments. And, you know, as a rep over at Winstead, you guys probably see that uniquely more than a lot of people. But how do you design for that scale? How do you design for a little bit of that flexibility in really the furniture control room space?
Yeah, so obviously, technology changes quickly. There's always the next best thing around the corner. So whenever you're talking about a professional purpose-built console, a big part of the attraction to that is the fact that it is modular and it's expandable and even reconfigurable. Obviously, they're built with a steel frame and a steel superstructure, so they're made to be taken apart, added onto, put back together, moved around if they need to be. The monitor mounts are flexible for changing sizes of monitors, whatever the case may be. But, these control rooms are always in a state of evolution, right? So change is inevitable. And, purpose-built professional consoles are an important part of future-proofing that room. And so our team of designers here are very cognizant of that fact. And as they're designing a control room, they're always figuring out and trying to think about what's next around the corner and what they can do to make that room as flexible as possible.
Dan, same question to you, but more from a technology side. Obviously the furniture and, the rooms are designed to be a little bit more flexible. But if I was to say as an AV integrator that gear was moving around and unplugging and replugging all the time, that would sound absolutely terrifying. How do you deal with that?
Well, building off of what Brent was saying, it starts with understanding that these control rooms, right? And you can, again, to your point from earlier in a conversation from a few minutes ago, define control rooms, command and control environments, however you want to, in all those different markets and what have you. It's understanding that these spaces are typically built with a 15 to 30 year life expectancy of the room itself. So when Brent's talking about technical furniture, he's talking about something that's going to withstand 24/7 repeated use, 10, 12-hour shifts of operators for that kind of duration. So the ability to, pull off end panels or work surfaces that over time do, get diminished and scuffed and need to be refreshed or what have you, or to Brent's point, the monitor sizes change. All those things come into play. And that's very unique about this environment versus, say, your average, conference room or classroom space, that the technology is getting refreshed every 5 to 6 years. Now, relative to the technology in the command and control space, it really is just a hardened version of the AV technology we may deploy in conference rooms. So the life cycle of that technology is still anywhere between 6 and 10 years, depending upon what we're using, what the use case is, the mission, and all that stuff. But there's similarities, but there's also differences. And it starts with understanding that that space is going to live there in some existence and form for that long. And then 2, you got to dial into what the mission is. You have to understand what they're trying to achieve in that space, because that's going to help you to understand, do I need something that's going to have a fixed frame mentality like a big matrix switcher or a monolithic video wall processor? Do I need to have flexibility and scalability built into these systems because A, maybe I don't know that I don't know, or because, and in the biggest case, data points are changing. Applications and software and what we can do with technology is changing. So we need to allow for those new data points, that new content to come in that informs those operators and analysts and dispatchers and control technicians that are in that space. So the modularity and flexibility conversation, the scalability, the word that I like to use with it, really permeates all aspects of the environment. And that's where you design from, not the technology. You design from the environment, you design for the mission.
Well, it's interesting talking about life cycles of rooms like that, because what you've got is warring, what I'll call warring life cycles, right? A tech manufacturer wants you to buy new stuff every 3 to 4 years, which is great. But the furniture is going to be far more flexible. The life cycle in the furniture world and the design world is a little bit longer. You've got these weird overlaps where maybe we're changing gear out, we're switching gear out, we're putting new furniture in, we're bringing all these new tools in. And Brent, one of the things that I've noticed that Winstead does really well is find ways to adapt to not only the product life cycles, but maybe some of the messaging, some of the challenges that the industry is facing. Obviously you guys just went through a really nice rebrand as well, but talk to me about some of the ways that you deal with maybe some of those different life cycle expectations and how you're reaching some of those new audiences.
Yeah. So, obviously like you said, the technology changes probably more frequently than, the technical furniture probably has to change. So we find ourselves, in many situations where, they're updating a control room and, they're putting in new technology. The furniture is still very functional from, an operational standpoint and still very sturdy, stout, and, functional as far as housing equipment goes. But because they're replacing the technology or whatever, they'll end up replacing the furniture as well, even though the furniture may not have outlived its useful life cycle. But like you pointed to earlier, aesthetics is a big thing too. So their console may still be functionally perfect, but nowadays with control rooms sort of being the center of attention, right? They're high tech, they're cool, people like to go in them, and most of the executive team likes, they like to show it off. So even though they didn't necessarily need to purchase new technical furniture, a lot of times they do because it's been refreshed, it's got some new materials, it's a much more modern aesthetic, if you will. And so, we find ourselves in a lot of those situations as well.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, Brent, especially thinking about showrooms as showpieces, right? And Dan, that's a challenge that you guys face as an integrator and an installer, right? You've got to have something that appeals aesthetically and frankly that can be visited by CEOs, executives, things like that looks really cool, but is also designed very practically for the end user. Obviously, the end user driving probably 90% of the actual function of the room. But, talk about how you design as an integrator from that perspective, because it's not easy.
No, there's always some form of compromise in there. But again, this is also not a unique challenge to the AV industry. We're constantly struggling with that form over function or function versus form scenario. What I think is unique about the command and control space is it actually can work to our advantage to have executives who say, I want an aesthetically pleasing space. And here's the rationale behind that. From an operator perspective and a usability perspective, we also want an aesthetic pleasing space. We don't want harshness in the environment. We don't want distractions for the operators. We want something that's going to look sleek, that's going to be minimalistic in design, hide peripherals like copiers and printers and, signboards on the walls and use the right kind of coloring. So from it sounds it sounds counterproductive, but it's not. It's actually conducive to a control room environment if we lean into that as part of the conversation. But ultimately, yeah, you definitely need to always balance out form over function or form and function. We always design from that operator perspective. So traffic flow, sight lines, lighting, heating, the environmental conditions, arm reach that we talk about, and human factors when we start talking about designs, comfort of the operator. And all of that speaks very directly to the aesthetics of the space. And then you run up into the executive experience, which, obviously needs to be married into that as well.
Well, Dan, I'll stick with you here just a second and kind of follow up on that. We talk about these rooms, and you mentioned it just a second ago. They're not only going into AV-centered businesses. They're going into command centers in buildings. They're going into police departments. They're going into social media war rooms and things like that. But one of the challenges that you see in these new markets is that what I'll call the traditional AV channels aren't quite as established, right? So they may have an IT director or someone like that who is buying all the stuff off of Amazon, trying to build it themselves, because in a lot of cases, an integrator is considered a luxury in some of these newer environments. How do you combat that a little bit, and how do you proactively say, hey, I know that this isn't the norm for you guys, but here are some of the things that you should be going through from a channel perspective?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's one that we battle all the time because there's no centralized place realistically, at least here in North America. There's a couple of international bodies overseas, but there's no place here that sets command and control standards, that sets best practices, and that is somewhere that an end user, an uninformed user can go and say, that's my basis of design, and that's what I need to design around from a best practices perspective. So in that case, you're left to your own, which means I'm Googling something, and that's always going to turn out extremely well for everybody. So I think, the AV integrators, the IT integrators as well, can learn some of those just standard best practices. Learn about sightlines, learn about human factors and ergonomics in your design, learn about, basic room design and flow and traffic, learn about the right kind of technologies to deploy, because your standard AV over IP protocols, which are great for a lot of standard conference rooms, may or may not be a good fit for a control room design where things like redundancy, things like 24/7 uptime operation, things like hot spares and auto failover, and those types of things, where redundancy in power, redundancy in network, all of those things come into play where they may not to if you don't know about it, you're not asking that question, and then you're not thinking about it, and your client's not thinking about it. That also means as an AV integrator, I can sell more.
It does. That's true. And Brent, same question coming back over to you. Obviously, you guys work in not only just AV specific and control room specific environments, but you have all of these new installations, and Dan, you bring up a good point with things like sightline, ergonomics, human comfort. How are you teaching those new markets that may not know, whether it's the IT manager who doesn't give a rip about furniture, who doesn't give a rip about accessibility? How do you have those conversations in some of those newer industries, Brent?
Yeah, so obviously the pandemic has brought about, a very heightened awareness about employee health and wellness, right? So it's becoming an easier sell for us in lots of ways because, the operator, we come to work every day sort of thinking, how can we improve the work lives of, the operators who staff these control rooms? And of course, a lot goes into that. Obviously, you want your operators to be happy, healthy, comfortable, productive. And, there's a lot that goes into that. So we, and it even goes beyond the technical furniture that we provide. So we not only study, ergonomics and the comforts and the functionality of the workstation that the operator is sitting at, but we try to help, understand the whole ecosystem, right? We're not complete experts in things like, lighting and acoustics and traffic patterns and things like that. But we know, all that stuff can contribute to distractions and stress and, sort of this unseen discomfort in the room that people don't even realize is going on. And of course, all that leads to lots of bad things, stress and, poor quality of work and dissatisfaction and low morale and all that stuff that, as a human, we deal with on a day-to-day basis, especially in these sort of stressful environments that some of these control rooms can be. Not all of them are that way, but a lot of them are. And, anybody working at a workstation for long hours at a time like that, we feel there's definitely some very tangible benefits in, taking care of the human factor, right? Making sure that they can interact with the technology properly, do their job better, raise their, job satisfaction and all that good stuff that goes along with being, a comfortable, happy employee.
Well, and Brent, that's great that you mentioned that, talking about those newer markets and some of the education that we have to provide, because as an AV community, that's one of the places I feel like we can do better at is not only engaging, obviously, people inside of our industry, but people outside. And Dan, I know you've long been an advocate of doing just that, right? There are so many people, even in AV, that don't necessarily know applications, rollout plans, things like that for command control. And obviously, as you expand out into some of these newer and emerging markets, those people have no idea what's going on. Talk about some of the things that you'd love to see the industry do from an education and engagement standpoint.
Well, I think, first of all, standing on the shoulders of giants, people like Steve Emsbeck and Randy Smith with Winstead and Randy Pagden, those are three guys who I truly respect, who are forefathers of our industry. If I can call them that old, they're probably going to yell at me afterwards. But I think, our generation of command and control experts can pay some respect to them by getting organizations like Avixa, to commit to command and control as a line similar to unified communication or digital signage or conferencing, things along those lines, because there's an untapped world out there. There's a lot of misnomers and misconceptions and poor designs, or at least uneven and unbalanced designs, for lack of a better definition. And we owe it to our end users. We owe it to to the user experience, to the operator experience, and to those environments to set some best practices, set some standards, and train and educate. And I think Avixa really is the best one that's aligned for that. But again, I'm biased there. I'm hoping to spearhead some of that, or at least light that flame and ask others to help along the way. But really, it's advocacy. It's 100% advocacy. And however that looks like, whatever voices we can use now, we are. But if we can streamline and focus them, I just think that becomes a broader and a brighter message.
Agreed. Brent, same question over to you. What are some of the things that you'd love to see the industry do a little bit more of in terms of awareness and education? Yeah,
I would agree with Dan. I think Avixa is a great organization to start that conversation. And we too, as a company, we are, we're out there every day talking to the channel partners and companies and integrators and resellers and everybody. It's sort of our mission in life, right? For us, this isn't a nice to have. This is a must have. And so we're always out there, at events and trying to speak and doing things like this, like we're doing here today, and working with our channel partners to make sure that, this sort of, dedication to the human factor isn't something that should be a second thought. It should be something that it's completely built around the whole room, right? And of course, the technology that is in the room really takes center stage, right? Because it's fantastic. It's great. The technology is what's, solving the problem, and what's, is what most of the efforts into building the control center goes into. And in a lot of cases, as the project goes along and the furniture or the technical furniture, the workstations, whatever you want to call it, sort of creeps up on the back end a little bit, if you will, right? And we're just trying to make sure that, it's something to be considered on the front end in the early stages. Make sure that along with this wonderful technology you're bringing into your control room, that the furniture and the support that the operators need, the interface really between the operators and the technology, comes along in the early stages as well. And we sort of beat that drum every day. We do whatever we can. We've got, Dan mentioned Randy. Randy's out on the road constantly, singing that song to, all the channel partners and everybody who we can help, educate and learn about what we can do to help the control room function better.
Well, Brent, that's a great answer. And gentlemen, I appreciate you guys coming on today. We'll wrap up with this last question. Dan, I'll have you go first here. You know, you talked about that 20, 30-year product life cycle in command control. What is that next product life cycle, right? Where are we in the life cycle now? And what does the next one look like?
That's a great question. You know, we've gone through this iteration of starting with rear projection cubes in terms of video wall technology, and that's close to running its course. It's still a great technology used for the right applications, but it started to get marginalized when manufacturers made their LCD video wall displays that much better, modular, lower bezels, better technology, more redundancy, and hardened equipment in there. And then LED now is out there on the advent, right? So we're seeing LED going into command and control environments. It's not prevailing technology by any stretch, and there's a couple of factors that are preventing that from being the case. Although there's actively manufacturers that are out there trying to solve some of those problems in order to get it to be more command and control ready. So again, that's one of those things that I'm eagerly excited about from all that I hear from those players that are out there in that market. The KVM world continues to evolve relative to IP-based technologies and bringing in virtual devices and not just a hardware PC that they can control. Home-based operators and remote operators is becoming more and more prevalent, and the technologies are becoming more and more robust, more and more secure, in order to make that happen. So I think those are some of those things that we're seeing: automation, AI, machine learning. Those are pieces on the content side that are coming into play in terms of just making the information coming into the center more relevant, more real time, and more actionable. So I think those are some of the things that we see out there that are either happening right now or they're in process. Beyond those next 3 to 5 years, your crystal ball is as clear or as foggy as mine has been.
Look, I don't like to hear that from the experts. Maybe Brent's going to give me a more defined, clear answer that says, I know where it's going to be. Brent, maybe not 20 years, maybe it's 10 years. From an aesthetic and design perspective, where do you anticipate the command and control environment going? And where would you like to see it go? Maybe that'll get a better answer.
Yeah. So as technology changes, things get faster, smaller, more compact. So, we see really sort of, open aesthetic consoles, really sort of lightweight, pleasing to the eye, very sort of modern and minimalist, right? That's kind of what we see trending going forward. Dan brought up a good point too. The information, displayed on the walls and how that going forward is going to change with sort of the information displayed at the workstation, right? We live in the information age, right? Big data, all that stuff. So more and more, there's more data to process, more things to analyze, and situational awareness is, at a premium. And as we go forward, the information that's on the wall now, most commonly, will it be gravitating towards the operator at their workstation, which, could sort of dictate the size and number of monitors that a typical operator would be working with, which of course has a big effect on the size and the shape of the console. And so, we're sort of in a position where we kind of take the lead of the technology and how it's evolving. And, we try to learn from our partners like Dan about, what is coming down the road? What can we do? What do you see here going forward? So, we kind of see those trends of, open spaces, maybe bigger control rooms where people have, more room and, it's not so claustrophobic and so chaotic, right? And then sort of clean, modern aesthetic designs. And, we get lots of tips from, some of the European communities do a really good job. They're much more forward thinking when it comes to clean aesthetics and things like that. So we're trying to take all that in and sort of figure out here, like over the next 5 years, what are we going to look like? Our company's going through a lot of changes, rebranding, new products, new team members. We're excited about, what's to come over the next 5 years. And we're just now starting to kind of really get together and figure some of those things out. But we're excited about it, and good things are coming.
Well, Brent and Dan, I appreciate you guys coming on. I know we had to stay a little high level today, but maybe next time we can get in really, really granular, talk about maybe some user experience, operator experience, things like that. But I want to make sure that everybody watching this has an opportunity to really learn a little bit more about command and control. So we definitely have to have you guys on again. It was a great conversation. Looking forward to having you on next time. Brent and Dan, thanks so much.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. Loved it.
And thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, just email the guys. They're pretty receptive to emails. If you need any help, if you need any direction, email me, call me, whatever. I'll make sure you can get in touch with them. We love Brent and Dan, and they are industry experts. But thanks so much for tuning in. Hope you join us next week.